Hey guys, welcome back once again to Reignited, and we are working again on our 05 Magnum project. Now in our last episode, you saw that we removed those cylinder heads, saw that there was some damage to the piston on cylinder number 8, so we do have to actually remove this engine. So that's the first thing we're going to do in this episode. I'm going to show you how to remove the short block from the vehicle, and I'll show you a couple extra tips and tricks along the way. Now this is where it really comes into play that we remove that cowl panel along the back, because now we have so much access back here. That's what we're going to do. We're going to access those upper bell housing bolts. Now there's 4 of them, and there are 14mm bolts. So go ahead and remove those 4 bolts for the bell housing, and then we'll move on from there. Now I forgot to mention that there is actually this little shield right here that actually holds the wiring harness. That's actually bolted to 2 of those bell housing bolts. So there's a 13mm nut on 2 of those bell housing bolts that holds the shield in place. Then you just push it back out of the way to get those bell housing bolts out of there. So this last bolt here on the passenger side, the upper one, it also is the bolt that actually holds the dipstick tube in place. So it's probably going to be easier to get that one from underneath. It'll still be a 13mm nut holding the dipstick tube in place. And then once you get that 13mm nut off, then it's a 14mm bolt that actually goes into the bell housing. So let's go underneath the vehicle and go ahead and take care of everything else down there that we need to right now. So looking from underneath the vehicle, here you can see right there is going to be your dipstick tube nut where you need to pull that guy off. And again, once you slip that out of the way, there'll be a 14mm nut to pull that last bell housing bolt for the upper side. All right, you guys, next up, we're going to be removing the torque converter bolts. Now on the bottom side of the transmission bell housing, there's this little cover held in with a 10mm bolt. You just remove that bolt and all the torque converter bolts will be behind there. You'll have to spin the engine over to get them all, and there are 6 of them total. Okay, now we've gotten our torque converter bolts out of the way, and on the back side of the bell housing here, you have a series of 15mm bolts. Keep in mind that 2 of them on this side are going to go to the starter and will likely be a longer length, so you want to keep those bolts separate. Now it's going to be kind of hard to see, but on the front side of the bell housing, you've got a 16mm bolt right there, and there'll be another one on this side of the bell housing as well. You'll have to remove both of those bolts. Okay, we battled through the really tough part of being underneath the vehicle, getting to those torque converter bolts, bell housing bolts, all that. That is all loose. Now a special note here is that when you do go to actually pull the engine out, you will need to support the transmission. So stick a jack under there and actually just hold the transmission in its current position, or even raise it up just a little bit. That'll help to facilitate getting the engine out of there. Also, when you do remove those torque converter bolts, it's helpful to put your fingers up in there and 1, spin the torque converter a little bit just to make sure that you have all of those bolts removed, and 2, use your fingertips to push it back. It'll only move back about 1/4 of an inch, but it's just enough to help give you some extra clearance pulling out of there so it doesn't hang up on the torque converter itself. Now that we're on the top side, we'll have to remember to disconnect our knock sensors. There's one on each side, and also the crank position sensor, which is right down just above where the starter is mounted. So make sure you disconnect all those components. Get your lower radiator hose off of the front timing cover. A big thing that people don't realize is that you do not have to discharge your AC system to pull the engine out. You can actually just unbolt the AC compressor and let it hang out of the way. Depending upon which generation or model that you have, it'll either have 3 or 4 bolts that hold it in place. Some of them will have actually a nut on them and a stud. Do not despair, you can actually remove that stud itself. It actually has a little reverse Torx end on it, and they are not very tight. So if you happen to have a reverse Torx socket, you can just stick it on there and unscrew that stud. And then, like I said, the whole AC compressor assembly will just lay down out of the way, and you can get the engine out of there. So I've got the AC compressor unbolted out of the way. I have my lower radiator hose off. The last thing we need to do here is we need to go ahead and pull those little heat shield covers off of the motor mounts, and then actually unbolt the motor mounts themselves. At that point, the engine should be ready to come out. Now remember, once you have this thing all hooked up and you're ready to yank it out of there, more often than not, especially if this is your first time doing this, you will have forgotten something. So don't just go ham on the thing, cranking away and just yank it out of there. Go really slow and just listen for any sort of noises like something's not quite loose, and keep looking over it with a flashlight as much as you can just to verify you're free. Just go about 1 inch at a time when you're yanking it out until you're sure that it's absolutely clear, and then you can go ahead and finish pulling the engine all the way. Real quick, you guys, I wanted to mention we do have 1 more week available for our pre-sale on our brand new merchandise drop. Now remember, you can get 10% off using the code PREORDER10 and also free shipping on orders over $89. So I just want to thank you guys so much for your response to that initial video we did last week. The response has just been tremendous. I want to thank each and every one of you who have ordered so far. If you have not yet done so, please do me a favor, check out that link in the description below. Go check out and see what we have available and see if there's something there that you'd be interested in. All right, no doubt it's going to want to hang up on absolutely everything. And here's actually one area that I forgot to unplug, which is the MDS solenoids. There we go. Get that harness undone there. It's a couple of things it wants to hang up on, but it's not too bad so far. All right, we are free and clear. Time to yank this thing out of here. Let's go get this thing on the engine stand. All right, when you go to load these things up onto an engine stand, you cannot do so with the flex plate in place. You need to actually unbolt this and go ahead and take this little separator plate off as well. Pay attention as you do that though, as far as what orientation this goes. There's a little lip on here. That lip actually goes towards the inside of the engine itself. So just remember that when you're reassembling it. You'll notice that these flex plate bolts have a lot of Loctite on them. You want to go ahead and reapply some blue Loctite on these when you reinstall them. It is very easy to forget this plate when you go to reinstall. Do not. You will really regret that decision. So go ahead and make sure you've got this plate back in place before you reinstall the engine. Okay, so I know not very exciting stuff happening in this episode, but the very last thing we're going to do is we're going to remove this engine oil pan and we're going to knock this number 8 piston out of there. That way this block's ready to go to be cleaned up and put back together again in the next episode. All right, we're going to try to turn this thing over and get rid of some of the coolant up in the top side here that's still in the block without making a gigantic mess. We're going to make a mess no matter what. What you need. Broken, it's tragic, we're not all elastic, but maybe there's magic. Believe you could have it, and I know of sadness, the anxious and panic, the infinite vastness of all that is blackness. As you can see, the crankshaft journal is in terrific condition. No sign of any scoring or scarring whatsoever. Looks great. The cylinder looks great. It's gonna be an easy swap to just throw a new piston in there. So I feel like right now would be a good time to reiterate to those who are just joining us on this series why I'm not going deeper into this engine. Normally, now would be the perfect time, now that we have it all apart and on a stand, now would be the perfect time to change out our main bearings, change out our rod bearings, hone the cylinders, everything that you would expect to do, you know, change out the piston rings, everything you would expect to do on a rebuild. But again, the point of this particular series at this time is just to get this engine back together and running again so I can perform those Hellcat oil pump tests. After that time, this engine is going to come completely back apart because we are going to be doing some major upgrades, some internal upgrades to it. We are going to be swapping to the Eagle cylinder heads on there, so that would be a fun process to show you guys exactly how that happens. And we're going to be doing some other upgrades as well. So I hope you guys are there to follow along with me on that. Another good thing to keep in mind when you're working on a Hemi engine that has a drop valve seat due to an overheating concern, you need to find the source of the overheating, otherwise you're going to get it back together again and the same thing will happen. Now I was looking this one over just to see what I could find, and you can see right here we've got a snail trail of coolant running right out of the water pump. So it is in fact our water pump that has failed. So this will be getting a new water pump before we actually run this engine again. So I had to show you guys this because I thought it was actually really funny. Now when these valve seats go, it's normally not known to contaminate the bottom end with metal. As you saw in the top end there, it was mainly large chunks of metal that get up in the intake and then the cylinder. But when I pulled off this oil pan, I saw something that really startled me. Check it out. So it might be a little bit difficult to see down in there, but if you look here Yeah, right there. See that little silver piece in there? That is exactly what a rod bearing looks like when it fully lets go. And I'm like, what in the world? Do we have a rod bearing damage inside this engine? Like, what is happening here? But that is not what that is at all. Now that might be a little bit difficult to see, but what this is basically the tinfoil top to an oil jug. You know, when you pull the cap off, it has that little tinfoil cover you got to break through with your finger. That's what this is. So somebody had done an oil change at one time and got some of this down inside the engine, and it was down in the oil pan. But I gotta tell you, that gave me a real scare. Just want to give you guys an up close look at the damage of what exactly happens here with these pistons. That steel gets crushed down onto these ringlands and it absolutely destroys these things. But alas, that is going to do it for this episode. I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time on Reignited.